Barbara Cole, the curator of the Outdoor Art Collection here at UBC. And on this beautiful, lush fall day, I would like to make an acknowledgement that we're gathered here on the unceded and traditional territory of the Musqueam people. And just on a personal note, I'm always filled with such gratitude to be able to live and work and learn on their lands and from such conscientious stewards. So thank you for joining us this afternoon to help celebrate two of the artworks out of the 24 in the Outdoor Art Collection, so Stela 1 and Stela 2, and also Cumbria by Robert Murray. Just to give you a sense of how things are going to unfold, I'm going to read some words from the Mayhew family, who were the generous donors of Stela 1 and Stela 2. And then I'm going to hand it over to UBC President Santa Ono, and then Santa will hand over to Belkin Director Emeritus Scott Watson. And then following Scott's remarks, we'll reconvene up at Cumbria at 3:15. And it's just about a 10-minute walk from here, but if anybody needs a ride, we can certainly arrange for that as well. So with that, it's my pleasure to read these words by Anne Mayhew. If I can get the cadence down. Thank you for giving me this chance to offer a few words at this significant moment. A moment that means a great deal in terms of my mother, Elza Mayhew's life work, and to us, her family. Between us all, we have many connections to UBC. My mother's sculptures are mostly based on the human form. Her monumental columns, too, are based on the human form, albeit larger than life. Both Column of the Sea at Confederation Center in PEI and Co-Spirit at UVic stand some 16 feet high. They're all based on the human position, tall, straight up and down, frontal. There's a front and a back, and however abstract, they bear a benign countenance. But Stela 1 and Stela 2 are different. There are no faces on these sculptures. They're not totemic. Stelae, from the Greek word stel, were upright pillars or slabs with inscriptions used as tombstones or monuments. These stelae bear inscriptions too, messages. You may notice Elza inscribed on Stela 1, and on Stela 2, Elza's maiden name, Lovett, is etched partway up, and farther down, Mayhew. As well as other markings waiting for interpretation. People like to leave their mark on things, she once said. In 1936, Elza Mayhew received a BA from UBC with double honors in French and Latin. Her honors paper was on Roman tombstones. This is a little-known but hugely significant influence on her work. Art historian Kenneth Coode Smith wrote that Elza's sculptures stand as markers, as boundary stones at the frontiers between one world and another. They act as a gateway. I tend to see the stelae as gateposts, directional signs, pointing, asking, where do we go from here? Thank you and safe travels, Anne Mayhew. So with that, my pleasure to introduce President Santa Ono.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to be here with you on this beautiful afternoon. And it's a momentous occasion to be here to really honor Elza Mayhew, but also what these sculptures represent. We often talk about the importance of art on the campus, and I was just remarking how the buildings will be changing, as they have been changing regularly on the UBC campus. And listening to the significance of the art and what the artist had in mind, the sculptor had in mind as points of reference in a changing world. That's exactly what we have in mind when we talk about outdoor art. It's wonderful to talk to alumni of the institution who remember the campus as it was. And I think the significance of this outdoor art is that I hope that the art will stay exactly where it is today as time passes, and will provide a point of reference to what is wonderful about UBC, and also be pieces of art that will hopefully have faculty, staff, and students pause and reflect as to the significance of the sculpture. And the wonderful thing is that you have here a little bit of a description of the sculpture, Stela 1 and Stela 2. So art is incredibly important, surrounded by medicine and neuroscience and dentistry. I believe, as my phone goes off, playing Harry Potter, that it's incredibly important for everyone to be grounded in the arts, because it really nourishes the soul and the spirit of individuals. And if you think about the health scientists and the medics that will be training around here, it's incredibly important for them to have their souls and their spirit to be nurtured by the beauty of art. None of this is written on my speaking notes, but it's just coming from my heart. And that's why I wanted to say that this gift and today's dedication of the sculptures is why it means so much to me, and why it's so important to have outdoor art. And as you know, I want to do everything I can to support much more outdoor art on this beautiful campus, to provide that point of reference, and also to have people pause in their very busy days and to think about the meaning of art, but also their interaction with others. And it's particularly fitting, I think, first of all, to thank the Mayhew family, but also the President's Advisory Committee on Campus Enhancement for their recommendation and for their selection of this. And our office is really pleased to be supportive of the work of the President's Advisory Committee. They work incredibly hard to find appropriate pieces of art to really enhance the campus, but also to help form the young minds that pass through the campus and who will pause here and think about what they're reading in terms of the outdoor art. This kind of art exposes us to the unexpected. Hopefully it provokes everyone that pass by. It inspires us. It asks us to think about our history. Even just looking at the sculptures and thinking about what they're made of. I thought they were actually made of concrete, but they're not. They're made of aluminum. And they were once white. And as you can see, they're no longer white. And so they changed as well, and all of that tells a story. Since the late 1940s, UBC's outdoor art collection has enriched the campus environment. The number of outdoor art sculptures is growing, and we hope that it will continue to grow. And together these artworks give voices to the multiple stories about the history of our university and Vancouver. And hopefully as the collection grows, it will reflect the diversity of people that are here on campus, and ask us to think about the remarkable diversity of individuals that make up this great institution. So it's an ever-evolving narrative about art, space, place, and reflects our own sense of ourselves. So I hope that you're just as excited as I am with these fine additions to the art collection. Stela 1 and Stela 2 will greatly enrich this collection and will significantly increase the representation of women artists and UBC artists in this collection, something that we hope to honor in the years ahead. So I just want to close and say, before Scott comes to the microphone, that thanks again to the Mayhew family for this generous gift. Stela 1 and Stela 2 will bring joy to the UBC community for many years to come. No matter how these buildings might change, they will be points of reference. They will be constancy in the evolution of this campus. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, President Ono. Before I begin, just a shout out to Judith Hall and Ann Pitternick, who are here. These stalwart members of the President's Committee on Campus Enhancement had a lot to do with the revival of public art program. So I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you've done all the work you've done. Here is the fruit of some of that work.
Bravo.
And there's a third person that was probably on the committee, I don't know you, I'm sorry, but shout out to you too. I just want to say a few words about Elza Mayhew. Elza Mayhew, as you might have gathered, was in her day, which would be the 50s and 60s and 70s, was one of the most well-known and respected artists in Canada. That's borne out by the fact that these works went to Venice in 1963, where they represented Canada on the world stage. Elza Mayhew, typical of a mid-century modernist, if you will, worked intuitively. When she wrote about her process, she would say things like, the works reveal themselves. The sculpture slowly reveals itself on many levels. Having said that, she worked with a vocabulary of forms and ideas that took a long time coming to her. I don't know her biography, but she was a war widow with 2 children at the end of the war. She was born, I think, in 1916. And one of the first things she did as a single mother was spend a year in Japan in 1953-54, thus joining many mid-century BC modernists who looked to Japan for a source of ideas about modernism, elegance, and the way to integrate art and life. I'm thinking of B.C. Benning and Arthur Erickson, who also spent a lot of time in Japan and made Japanese connections in their work. She then studied with the sculptor Jan Zak privately for 3 years, 55 to 58, and then went to Oregon in 62. She went to Oregon in 59 to get an MFA. I didn't know they gave out MFAs in the late 50s, 60s, but they did, and she got one. So she was 39 when she started studying Jan Zak. So in midlife, she determined that she was going to be a serious professional artist. And she made a very strong body of work, and we're really glad that the 2 pieces have come to UBC. Her ideas about art probably were even brewing her mind when she did her undergraduate, when she did her first degree, because as President Ono reported from Anne Mayhew's writing, she did a paper on Roman headstones when she did her honors degree in Latin. So a headstone is a stela, so she was thinking about them even when she was an undergraduate. She made a study of various archaic ancient architectures of the world, which she's not literal about quoting them, but she knew a lot about the art of the Yucatan, China, ancient Sumeria, Greece and Rome, of course. All these cultures, and along with many cultures in Africa, have stelae in their cultures. In other words, figurative human-sized gravestones, or stones that might just mark an event, or a monument, or a happening. And these figurative sculptures, I say they're figurative because they're about as tall as a person and as wide as a person, are not just figurative, they're also very architectural. And it was very important to her that the sculpture relate to and address a human body, and that she thought of them as thresholds, entrances, reflections of the unknown, recesses of the mind, a mental landscape. They're meant to be evocative and transformative. And she wrote, I think this is her best quote, and one I will use in other circumstances, that art is nothing if it is not a philosophy. I think that, I don't know this, I'm guessing that she was probably interested in the work of Carl Gustav Jung and archetypes, and that she was struggling to find within her survey of sculpture around the world, past and present, universal archetypal forms that would correspond with a universal consciousness. That's what I think she was up to. But even if we don't know that, I'd like to really thank Barbara and Owen for finding this site. I think that I know they spent a lot of time and work finding a site that was appropriate for these. We had agreed that they needed nature. They needed to be backgrounded by trees or something like that. But also they're highly intelligent manifestations of a mid-century modernist ethic. And the architectural surround here gives that a real good, it's a background text that makes the sculptures even more readable. So thank you. I know did it take 2 years to get things something like that. So anyway, many people worked on this, and I think the installation is very successful. So thank you.
So thanks everybody, and thanks Santa Ono and Scott for your remarks. So we'll reconvene at Cumbria, and there we'll be hearing from John O'Brien and Keith Wallace and our very special guest, Robert Murray. Thanks everybody for making your way up here. It looks like we just about, I don't think we even lost anybody on the route, so that's fabulous. I'm just going to say how things will unroll and then turn it over right away. So our first speaker will be Professor Emeritus John O'Brien, followed by Keith Wallace, who is the curator and in charge of outdoor art when this all first started. And then finally the remarks from our special guest, Robert Murray. So really looking forward to the role. So John O'Brien.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to see so many people here on such a windy, grand day, and it's wonderful to have this sculpture, Cumbria, in this particular place. I'll ask Bob what he thinks about the location of it, but I can hardly imagine a better location than this. You've got sight lines from the east and the west, not so much from the west, but wonderful sight lines from the east. There's room for it to breathe between these two buildings. It sits up on a plinth, but without seeming high, and animates the space in a way that I think is quite brilliant. And you might think that it could have been made for this location, but when it was first made in New Haven, Connecticut, by Lippincott, Bob working as a pretty young artist at that time, having worked with Barnett Newman before that, to build this sculpture in a industrial fabrication plant, and it went to Toronto for its first exhibition in an exhibition at the City Hall that was an infamous exhibition that was much written about, and it still gets written about. He commented at that time that he didn't imagine any particular location for this sculpture or for any of the work that he was doing, that it would be habitable, it would find itself hospitable in a natural landscape or in an urban scape, in an urban setting. And that is part of the modernist vision that this work carries. It's part of its force. It's part of the universal side of what it represents, which is a vision that Bob has kept faith with for over 50 years. And he keeps faith by continuing to paint his sculptures, by continuing to work with fabricated materials, in which the forms dictate the color. And so you've got the geometric forms here, the two vectors sticking up, and that, he will tell you, determines the very particular color that he chooses for this work or for another work. And so this work, actually, in the course of going up and down several times, as Keith will talk about in a moment, had its color changed, and now it is back to very close to the original color. Is it Harvard yellow, Bob? here's a number. So I don't know why I mentioned Harvard. I must have read it somewhere. Harvard's crimson anyway. This yellow. The work is well traveled. After being in Toronto, it went to another infamous exhibition in Battery Park, New York. From there, it was purchased by the Department of Transport in Canada to sit at the entranceway of the International Airport in Vancouver, YVR. And you can imagine why YVR would want that. I'm not going to talk about further circumstances. You can imagine in the late 60s why they would want this piece. There are intimations of flight in it. It looks far lighter than its 40,000 pounds, or whatever it is. I don't know. That was one weight that I read somewhere. And it looks as if it could almost levitate. And so that would have been of interest to an airport. But it also projected that modernist vision that is so present in the work, which the airport wished to relate to its own image of being a progressive institution that welcomed international travelers, that was an international site, just the way, in some sense, this is a homeless sculpture that can move in many different places, although it has ended up here on this campus. And we are so lucky, Bob, to have it here. It is a wonderful work. Thank you.
It's a great honor and delight to have you and Sintra here, Robert and Sintra. Thank you for coming for this. I was, prior to Barbara Cole, the curator of outdoor art, and worked with Robert trying to find a site for this particular project. This is a sculpture that's had a really long journey. It's been a journey of half a century, more than half a century. And as John pointed out, it was first shown in Toronto in Sculpture 67, which was a centennial project, which had 51 artists on the plaza of the City Hall of Toronto. And it was a very important exhibition showcasing contemporary sculpture in Canada. And then it moved on to the other exhibition, Sculpture in Environment in New York, which had, I believe, 24 artists, and they had sculpture placed around the city. Robert's work was sited in Battery Park. And these two exhibitions were very important because they really marked a pivotal point in sculpture in public spaces. They were no longer kind of commemorative objects, which many public art projects were prior to that. And they stood as art objects on their own within an urban environment. And there were very few exhibitions like that before, like those two exhibitions. The one in New York was in 1968, and probably one of the most famous outdoor art sculptures that was cited that same year was in Chicago, and that was the Picasso, the Chicago Picasso, which was cited in front of a major building, and it was a major piece, and created a lot of attention. So after the New York show, the Department of Transport, as John pointed out, approached Robert about purchasing Cumbria for the airport, and it made perfect sense as a modernist sculpture with a newly opened airport. And will convey one story that Robert told me about the purchase of the piece, and that they asked him how much he wanted for it, and he gave them a price. And they really thought that was a bit too much. And why? Because it was used. It had already been shown. So they thought it really wasn't worth as much. So anyways, it was purchased, and it was cited in 1969. It was probably the most monumental sculpture in Vancouver at the time. The only one that would be comparable is Gerhard Klaas's Tuning Fork, which is over by the Music Building from 1968. And later that year, in December of '69, the Blodell family donated the a Henry Moore sculpture in Queen Elizabeth Park called Knife Edge, two-piece, which is also a monumental sculpture. But other than that, there really wasn't anything of this scale. There was quite a bit of excitement about that sculpture being sited at the airport, and I remember when there was a lot of publicity about it, and people would actually make a special trip to go and see it. I did. The problem with it was that it was in the middle of the thoroughfare, so it was really a drive-by sculpture and not one that you could walk around and kind of spend time with. But on the other hand, there were, in the 23 years that it was sited there were probably hundreds of thousands of people that went by that sculpture. Now, it was removed in '93. Some people say it was due to public opinion, that people kind of weren't happy with this modernist sculpture, but actually the Department of Transport and the federal government was selling the airport to private interests, and the people who bought the airport in the '90s decided they wanted a different art program, and it was really focused on First Nations art, and they do have some really fantastic pieces at the airport of First Nations art. However, Robert's piece was moved without a lot of sensitivity and put into storage, and it was badly damaged. And Tony Onley, I believe, is the person who researched where it was and campaigned for it to be refabricated by Murray Latta, a fabrication company in Surrey, and they paid for it and donated it to the university. So the university was kind of its second phase of its history, and it moved to UBC in 1995. And it was placed between the Belkin Art Gallery and the Lacera building, and it really wasn't the greatest site for it. It was enclosed. There was a berm on one side. You really couldn't walk around it. It was not on a major traffic area. So it was a bit lost, and it was there for 20 years as well, until it became compromised through the bolts that were holding it together, which corroded, and it collapsed. And I kind of feel that it was asking for some attention to be maybe recited. So it went into storage back to Murray Latta, who originally fabricated it. And then the search was on to find another site for it. And Robert came out for that. And the two of us, we walked around the campus at least a couple of times with the landscape architect, Dean Gregory, and tried to find a site. Now, this is a huge campus, and you'd think it would be quite easy to find a site. So we walked around, we looked at the grassy knoll that's on the other side of Southwest Marine in front of the Rose Garden as a site, but it would have been another drive-by, really. We looked at the entrance to the old Student Union building. There were some trees there, but it really needed a more open space. We looked at the pharmaceuticals building on Agronomy Road, and there was a berm there, and it seemed like that had potential. And then there was the Orchard Commons, was another site, but it was also on a berm, but none of them really felt right. And this site actually, on the other side of the road, was where we originally thought of it happening. Because this just seemed natural to be near the O'Dane Arts Center and the BC Binning Studios. It's got open space. It's got that vista from the main mall looking down. But that site was very problematic, and that had a huge amount of underground infrastructure. And the three things that were really problematic were, it can't go there because there's going to be a new building there. It can't go there because this is a commons area for students to sit. And it can't go there because there's too much underground infrastructure. So we kept looking at this. This area was in construction at that point. And kept looking, well, what about there? There. And the answer was, well, you know, it's going to be a student commons area, so it's not really available. And asked again, what about there? Seems like a really good spot for it. No, can't happen. And then a few months later, campus and community planning said, well, what about there? It's like, okay, good spot. So this is where it has ended up. And I think this is really where our first choice was. And I think it's really the most appropriate spot for it. I mean, you get to see it from so many different vantage points. Being able to walk around it, you really see the different, I mean, it seems like a very minimal, simple sculpture, but everything changes as you walk around it. It's very different when you're up at the top there. And, you know, you two were saying, like, when you're up there, it's like your eye goes down and then it just goes up into the sky and up into nature. And it has this presence here that it didn't have behind the Belkin. And it seems so much larger here for some reason, and I don't know why that is. And it really made me realize how important the siting of these sculptures is and how it affects the buildings. I mean, these are very contemporary buildings. This sculpture is over half a century old, but it doesn't look that. It looks very contemporary and really holds up and has an incredible presence here. And also having it elevated makes a huge difference to the way it was sited before, where you kind of looked down and it was sitting on the ground and kind of, you know, attached to the ground, whereas here it has this kind of lightness to it, even though I think it weighs about 15 tons of steel. So here it is. I think everybody's very happy with the siting, and I hope, Robert, that you are. And thank you for making this sculpture. This is a very important piece in his overall production, and it gets talked about a lot in any writing about his work. So I think UBC is very proud to have it, and thank you very much.
Well, I suppose what I should say is, does anyone have any questions? Because these people ahead of me have pretty much summed it up. Why Cumbria? I think that name was actually suggested by Professor Eric Arthur, who was a neighbor of mine on the island. And so Professor Arthur actually named Cumbria, and he liked the idea that it was the archaic version of the word, which is really what the Precambrian Shield is all about. And that's where Eric's Island was, and that's where I now go in the summer. Did that answer your question? Well, it's been wonderful for Sintra and I to come out here and see the piece installed. This is the first glimpse I've had of it since they actually set it up. And closer? Is that better? Okay. So I'll say that again, that Sintra and I are very pleased to see the piece, and it was one of the real motivating factors for me coming all this distance. You don't realize how big Canada is until you fly across it. But at any rate, it's been the hard work of a lot of people, as Keith has mentioned, and Owen was one of them. And he and I spent a lot of time together, just working on the color alone. And this is closer to the original color of the piece than it has been on several occasions in the past. It's a polyurethane paint, which is supposed to be pretty durable, and nonetheless, it's something that 8-10 years from now, you probably have to be touched up or refurbished. Nothing is forever, and I guess that's been one of the amazing things about this piece to me, is that I built it such a long time ago. Originally, it was a hollow construction, because that's all the Lippincott could bend. They didn't have a heavy enough brake press to make it out of a single piece of metal, which is always what I wanted. So the nice thing about it is that when it got moved from the original got moved from the airport to UBC, we engaged a company. Well, Don Lippincott came out here, and he and I went around and must have seen about 5 or 6 major fabricators in the area. And we picked this company, Murray Latta, mainly because they had a big enough brake press and actually a clean enough press that we could get the bends in the steel without being compromised by sherds of other metal that sometimes happens with heavy braking. So this is the heaviest piece I've ever built in that sense. Most of the others have ended up being hollow construction, which is made in an entirely different way, as you can imagine. So the other piece, well, Keith was rather polite about it, but it was actually moved from its original position in the airport by a bulldozer. And I met the poor old Scottish fellow who operated the bulldozer, and he apologized for what had happened to the piece because they bent the hell out of it. And there was no way that Lippincott and I could see to refurbish the old piece or even rebuild it again without going to a solid plate. So that's when we finally seized the opportunity to remake the piece out of solid material. And it makes a difference not only to the way the piece stands, but the looks of the sides in particular, the way the light hits the sides of the piece. And I think this has worked out well. So I'm, for a piece this old, that's been, where there's been many opportunities to have simply dragged it off to the scrap heap, that hasn't happened. People have, like me, have dedicated themselves to making sure that the work survived. And I don't think it's ever looked better. And I didn't know I was going to get emotional about it, but I'm very pleased to see it. It's a pretty extraordinary thing to have happen.
Well, with that, thank you everybody for coming, and please stick around, ask Bob questions, or just have a good social moment. Thanks, everybody.